Now, Cincinnati Connection, connecting you to your community.
Well, welcome back to Cincinnati Connection. I'm your host, Sharice Gibson. A busy show this morning as we discuss the Urban League State of Black America report in regards to health, and we discuss gun violence in our communities, how a woman is hoping her son's memory lives on as she comforts the mothers of other gun violence victims. But first, we begin with an op-ed by Cincinnati Enquirer's Kevin Eldridge titled, quote, "Stop resisting, it may just save your life." This is Kevin's advice to young black men and women across the city of Cincinnati when they are confronted by police. Advice and an opinion that has rightfully so seen some mixed reaction. But as Kevin says in the article, it can be the difference between life and death. So we had to bring Kevin in studio this morning. Kevin Eldridge of the Cincinnati Enquirer, along with a friend of mine, Chris Miller, Director of Education at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Thank you guys so much for joining us this morning. Kevin, I told you I was anxious to have this conversation, and I had this on the back burner, but I'm really ready to have it. I'm sure that you can understand the mixed reaction here to the headline, "Stop resisting and may save your life." Some may look at the instances where you have Philando Castile, for instance, over in Minnesota. He was shot in his car while reaching for his wallet. Could it be as simple as stop resisting in order to protect yourself?
Well, it's never that simple. So I don't want to make it seem like the column is an oversimplification of what we see happening there. You know, my point is that I think as we talk about this issue, that compliance has to be a part of the conversation. Because while we see instances like Philando Castile and Tamir Rice and John Crawford III and other situations where resistance was not necessarily a factor in the outcome, I look at the larger percentage of interactions that African Americans have with police.
Yeah.
And how those situations end up. And I think by and large, we can always pull out the extreme cases, but I'm talking about the pedestrian stop, the traffic stop. In most instances, the focus ought to be getting out of that situation safely as possible. There are no guarantees. They're not 100% guarantees, but I do think if you're looking at percentage-wise, compliance is going to get you out of a situation safely more often than not. My argument to anybody is show me one case where resistance resulted in a positive outcome for a suspect, black or white. So that's kind of my point in that.
Chris, you have something to say on that one?
Well, I think I've seen incidents where non-African Americans have resisted in some form, but yet their life was preserved. I think what's important about the conversation is also from a historical standpoint, and we can look to Ohio, the state of Ohio, for an example. Ohio became a state in 1803, and the first piece of legislation by Congress here in Ohio were the black laws. It was a different set of laws. In 1804, it was enacted, and it was the first by any legislative body in the country. And so it set a precedent to where there's a different set of standards, a different set of rules based on race. And those laws were even revised and strengthened in 1807, which included good behavior. And so we see the residue of that to where if African American woman or man is having a bad day, they can't afford to be passionate because it's intimidating. They can't afford to be just to be angry because that's a threat. When we do not see that same grace given to other ethnic groups when it's dealing with law enforcement.
Well, and over at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, you all have a program that is focused on implicit bias. And you recently had a conversation about the trauma of gun violence in the community and in America. Do you feel like that resistance that we see stems from more fear? That no matter what happens, whether I resist, whether I comply, there's still a fear that I could lose my life here?
Well, I think it's a situation, too, where we're kind of romanticizing when it comes to drama, per se. I think Donald Glover, his video, "This is America," you see the correlation to how life is treated, a black body is treated in versus a gun. And that's been an ongoing theme for our country that we really need to pause and just have a critical conversation about.
Well, Kevin, based on your article, I feel like you view resistance differently. You say that, for instance, you say here, there is a way to resist unfair treatment and brutality, and that's through joining particular movements. What movements are you talking about here?
Yeah, well, I think anybody who's out working for social justice, who's trying to end these unnecessary encounters with African Americans. There are plenty of organizations in Cincinnati, black and white, that are working on these issues. We've got a collaborative agreement here in Cincinnati where they're soliciting community input on how to make things better between police and citizens. So I don't want people to misinterpret that resisting means don't do anything, don't address these issues that Chris is talking about. I think they're absolutely important. We need to talk about them. We need to deal with them. We need to push for change. What I'm talking about is in the specific heat of the moment of a traffic stop or a police interaction. There are ways to fight. There are ways to show police that we don't appreciate, in an instance, how we've been treated. I'm gonna get your badge number. I'm gonna find out, who you are, and I'm gonna use the channels to try to address this situation. Now, I understand, the systems haven't always worked for us, and so there's a skepticism among many African Americans. They're like, well, you can't trust the police, you can't trust the system, we can't get justice the right way, we can't get it in the streets. I'm concerned about lives. I want to see people live and survive. And so that's where I was coming from that situation is, how do we get black people safely out of interactions with police as safely as possible, and then let's try to remedy it through other means that we can. And sometimes that includes protests, Black Lives Matter, who's out there protesting and making sure that their voice is heard. Voting is another way. A lot of people don't believe in that, but I believe, in the power of the vote. So those are some of the ways that I think we need to fight back.
Well, Chris, the Freedom Center is now involved with the Regional Coalition Against Hate, am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so with that involvement, I know that the Cincinnati Police Department is also kind of giving their input in all of this. Do you ever think there will be a conversation with police officers to sort of explain to them, to help them understand that some people are simply afraid, which you've heard some people say, well, I didn't comply because I was simply afraid. And this doesn't go for every single situation. Some do imply force, but some are afraid and they believe that resistance comes from that standpoint.
Right. And for me, it becomes a personal mechanism within me, especially when I have interactions with police officers. Police officers, I would say that I don't know, because I know quite a few police officers. They have a very important job to do. I respect the job, the work that they do. But I often find myself trying to make sure that the individual that I'm interacting with not only understands that, yes, I am a black man, but I'm also a husband, I'm a father, to understand that we actually do have something in common. And so I hope that I'm treating you with respect, and I would expect the same from you as well. And so I think we've always had this conversation, it's the talk, I believe, about what to do. And I believe a few months back, the show Blackish had an episode dealing with that, about the talk.
We have P&G here with the talk as well,
So, that's something that's always existed. Right. I think what we have now is people are growing tired of seeing the same episodes occur. Of course, many people do comply and do what they need to do.
Yes.
But what's horrendous is that when people do comply and their life is still threatened, and there's no justice and recourse for it. And so that's where the outrage comes.
So, I think that this opens up the dialogue. Your article, Kevin, opens up the dialogue for an even bigger conversation, and having, the Underground Railroad Freedom Center part of that conversation allows people to really express their feelings. I hope the Regional Coalition Against Hate really brings everyone to the table so that they can have that type of discussion. So thank you so much, both of you, Chris and Kevin, for joining us this morning. You always bring thought-provoking things here on the Cincinnati Connection.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, we break down the Urban League State of Black America Health Report, the Center for Closing the Health Gap, up in studio. Up next. Each year, the National Urban League releases a report that contains insight on its namesake, the state of Black America. Now, this report not only offers analysis and commentary, but it gives us a snapshot of the National Equality Index, a tool used to track racial equality in America. While this year's report puts a focus on the digital revolution, it also shines a light on the state of Black health in America. So here to break down the latest findings is Closing the Health Gap COO Renee Mahaffey-Harris. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Okay, so Renee, and taking a look at the report, when we break everything down, we're showing that in that health report, when we're talking about health disparities, they've either stagnated or they've taken a minor step back. Now, for some, when you look at the numbers, they feel like there's no cause for concern, but there is. according to you, right?
Yes, it's alarming and it is a crisis.
Yeah.
In that over 50 years, we have not seen an improvement in health disparities across a variety of chronic diseases. And I think the reason for that is that health is more than the absence of disease. It is more than going to the doctor. 80% of our health has to do with our quality of life factors, whether or not you have good housing, transportation, social support, safety, education, live in environments where you can have access to healthy foods, and have the ability to go outside and walk and do those things that we can do and have control over as an individual.
Okay, so when you talk about also those factors, you said that some changes were made because of the Affordable Care Act and that being shot down. That could lead to a pretty dangerous trend, right?
It could lead to a huge dangerous trend because people won't have the ability to get their annual visit, annual well check.
Yeah.
So that prevention is really the key to improving one's health, right? And so if you no longer are able to have insurance, then you are going back to only going to the doctor when there's an emergency, or frankly going to the ER when there's an emergency. And we don't want to have that trend. We don't want to reverse the trend, especially when even with the Affordable Care Act, the disparities haven't changed.
No.
And again, access is critical, but access is a very small percentage of overall health. It's only 20% of health.
So when it comes to categories of health, where have we seen absolutely no change or some small decreases? Like, where are they?
In health as a whole?
Yes.
Or so in many of the chronic diseases, we're seeing from incidence of cancer to diabetes to hypertension, we're seeing those numbers increase and increase at in a larger percentage with younger people.
Really?
Yeah, and so that has a lot to do with lifestyle. That has a lot to do with the type of food and quality of food that we have access to. It has a lot to do with our kind of sedentary nature of us as people. You know, we have all these electronic devices, so we're not getting up and moving like we used to.
Well, it's funny you say it has a lot to do with lifestyle, because I thought in this day and age people were more aware of the effects their lifestyle can have on their health.
I don't think they're as aware as we think they are.
Yeah.
Because I think lifestyle is just kind of how we live every day.
Yes.
But I think that our society has become normalizing kind of using technology, being on the phone versus maybe a child going outside and playing and, you know, even just running around a tree, but just getting outside and doing things outside as a family. You know, I think that technology has hurt us.
Okay.
In many ways. I mean, it has advanced many things. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I like my technology. But it doesn't cause you to go out and do those things that we used to easily do as children and as families. And then, you know, really, when you look at health and the impacts of health have more to do with economic and the socioeconomic disparities that exist in our nation for Blacks and other minorities. So if you look at Cincinnati as an example, if our adults and children represent the highest level of poverty, and that we have the highest poverty rates, you know, in the top 10 cities in America.
Yeah.
Those factors influence our ability to have transportation, have good housing, to live in safe environments, to have good education and access to good education. So those factors are why we're not seeing a movement in disparities.
Yeah, we're talking about also a growth in the number of suicides committed by Black teenagers and young adults. You contribute this. Well, actually, the report contributes this to gun violence and an increased access to guns.
Increase access to guns. I also go back to technology. I think that when we look at, you know, how kids are bullied, you're bullied through cyberspace. I mean, it's, you know, much different than being taunted by friends or people at school. Then you're taunted on the internet or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat.
I'm taunted every single day, trust me, I understand.
So think about those compounded factors to young people. And, you know, overall, you know, we as a people and we as Black people have already suffered greatly, and that the residual impacts of slavery to our lives are still pervasive today, and that's why we don't see changes in the disparity gaps, because race is a construct that is an underpinning of health disparities.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, unfortunately we run out of time, but I mean, I know that a lot of people want to know exactly more about this report. We'll have that on fox19now.com, but for Center for Closing the Health Gap, where can they visit you all?
Closingthehealthgap.org.
All right, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Of course, we'll continue this conversation. We're going to have Renee join us back because there's so many more factors to this report that you have to hear about. We'll be right back. Well, although the number of shootings in Cincinnati has decreased from last year by more than 40%, some mothers were still forced to spend this past Mother's Day without their children due to gun violence. Minister Carolyn Shaw is one of those mothers. She lost her son Jaamal to gun violence back in 2005, and this year she's hosting a gala to give back to all of the mothers who share her story. She joins us today along with Pastor Dale Tolbert and Cindy Roy of Eve Center. Thank you guys so much for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, so can you just tell me a little bit more about Jaamal and your son and what happened in that situation?
Yeah, Jaamal was 21 at the time that it happened, his murder. So I was pretty messed up at the time of my son's death. So I had to process through grieving. So I know how other people, mothers, grieve losing a loved one. So 3 years later, I ran into Cindy through the Eve Center. And so I had to get my life in order to give back to other women.
And obviously, you're able to help other women now, and the Eve Center was such a driving force in your life. Can you tell us any more about the Eve Center and how it's helping women get through that grieving period?
It's an amazing organization. We have women that we train as volunteer peer counselors to meet a woman right where she is, no matter what the topic is. This one just happened to be such a tender point for us, that mothers were grieving over the loss of their children, but because of violence was very specific. Carolyn came through first receiving our services, but now she's trained as a volunteer peer counselor. And together we're doing GOLD, God Overcoming Loss from Death, specifically for mothers who've been impacted in this way in our community.
I mean, Pastor Tolbert, I just want to get your thoughts on gun violence that is happening in our community, and to have it hit so close to home. A member of your church, to have that hit so close to home for you. How do you think? What do you think about this?
Well, it's increased that we see. It has increased more. It's not gotten less. And Carolyn, when she lost Jaamal due to gun violence, he was very close to us. We loved him, and it hurt. It hurt so bad, all of us. And so we do understand with that feeling of losing a child. And we do understand that others have lost children as well, and they need comfort and not forgotten. There's many parents in Cincinnati who have lost children due to gun violence, kind of been forgotten. We want to love on them. We just want to bring them in, feed them a good dinner, and just love on them. And but my feelings personally is that we have to be able to connect to the community more and help them out as well.
And so is this the first time that you guys are doing this dinner?
Yes,
First time.
this is the first time, and we're actually excited about it. It's a vision that God has given me to do. So we're gonna get with other mothers to love on them. It's gonna be picture taking, sit down dinner, music. It's gonna be awesome.
So tell me this, now that you are volunteering over at the Eve Center, obviously you've benefited from it. What's the most difficult part in all of this and that grieving process?
Well, the grieving part is that you can get stuck there. You can get stuck at the year that it started, which it's been 14 years for me, but that with the Eve Center helps me to comfort other women. And I like that. I like to give back to help mothers, to know that they can move forward. They're gonna miss their child. We're not saying that we're not gonna miss them. But they're in our hearts, and that's something that no one can ever take from us. No one. So me giving back to the women, just to let them know that there is help and that we love them.
So when you guys get together to fellowship for Jaamal's gala, which of course is in your son's name,
Yes.
We can expect, will women from the Eve Center be available to speak with people? And of course, I know, Pastor, there'll be prayer, which in these situations you need so much of. If people wanted to attend, you guys are making this available to mothers, all mothers, for free, correct?
Yes, for the mothers
Yes.
and parents.
Mother plus guest is in no cost at all. We just ask for a $10 donation for any other guests, just to cover the bare minimum.
Okay.
This isn't going to be fancy, but it is going to be very full and very heartfelt. And just a time of remembrance and honor and celebration. Not a down feeling, but a lifting up and honoring.
All right, well, I thank you all for coming on. And, you know, I'm just so happy that you decided to do this because there are, unfortunately, a lot of mothers in our city that have lost children due to gun violence.
Yes.
So we'll have all of the information. And this is happening when again?
May 19th.
May 19th.
It's going to be May 19th.
Okay.
At the John Wesley UMC Church on 1927 West Kemper Road.
All right, thank you all so much. We'll have this on our website, fox19now.com.
Okay.
I'll make sure we share it on my Facebook page as well. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on Cincinnati Connection. Be sure to follow me on Facebook at Sharice Gibson TV.